I was wondering if you could elaborate on the function and how the observer and the interpreter work. Do we have enough time to go over that, or is that too in depth?
You mean the perceiver and interpreter?
Yeah.
From the book?
Yeah.
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Okay.
Well, just for those of you who haven't read the guidebook yet, I see our consciousness, as an engineer, I tend to try to reduce things to practical models, something practical and easy to understand. And for me, the way my perception works, it has two basic components. One I call the perceiver and one I call the interpreter. And for me, the perceiver is the portion of my awareness or my consciousness that brings in information from my environment, and that could be anything, anywhere, or from my environment, physical or non-physical. It brings in information into my awareness, but it brings it in at a subconscious level. So I'm not directly aware of everything the perceiver is bringing in. It would be pretty difficult for any of us to be aware of everything the perceiver is bringing in, because if you just think about all the things around you that are happening that somehow you're managing to ignore to be able to have this conversation, maybe it makes some sense what the perceiver does. But the information comes in at a subconscious level. The interpreter for me is the part of my consciousness that then looks at what the perceiver is bringing in and looks in my pre-existing memory and experience for the nearest similar thing and brings that to awareness. So just as a silly example, somebody asks you to, I'd like you to visit with my grandfather. You know, he died a couple of years ago. I'd like you to visit with him. And so you go home and you sit down in your chair and you close your eyes and you go through the process that you've learned. And you begin to perceive a face. And something just about the eyes, are reminiscent of an old actor named Walter Brennan. Anybody here know Walter Brennan?
I do.
Okay, just something about the eyes. Well, as the perceiver brings in your non-physical environment the information about what this woman's grandfather looks like, the nearest similar thing is the image of Walter Brennan's face, because the eyes are similar. So you see Walter Brennan. That's who you see. The interpreter presents that as the form that the information takes. And then later you go back to this person, you give them all sorts of information, they say, oh, by the way, I can prove that I visited with your grandfather. He looks just like Walter Brennan. And she says, well, no. Maybe his eyes a little, but no, you've got it all wrong. What's going on there is what I call interpreter overlay. Each of us has information coming in at a subconscious level that's interpreted into our conscious awareness by our interpreter picking the nearest similar thing and bringing that up as the form it appears as. We never see what's really there. We only see what the interpreter presents as a form. It's probably the biggest source of what's called inaccuracy in working in these non-physical realms. And I remember hearing years ago at the Lifeline program, evidently the participants had gotten into a big argument. They were supposed to, in the exercise, they were supposed to arrive at the reception, arrive somewhere, and then go to the reception center. And A bunch of the participants said, yes, I arrived in this area and I walked down this path and I turned to the left to get to the perception center or reception center. And then others said, well, no, you must have gone to the wrong place. I went down a path and I turned the other direction and went to the reception center. Evidently, they were in an argument for quite a while about which way you turn to actually get to the reception center, which for me is just completely laughable. Because if you understand that the perceiver brings in information like you're on a path, you're heading toward the reception center, if the nearest similar thing to you is some path you walk down where you turned right, you're going to perceive it, you're going to see it if you see anything like physical reality there, you're going to see it like you turned to the right. Somebody else is going to see it like they turned to the left. And then you get a big argument about who's right. It's like, stop, you're both right. You're just not perceiving what's there directly. You're perceiving your own individual nearest similar things. I had a friend named Sam Domenico who recently died. And Sam was one of those Mensa guys, an IQ somewhere beyond the stratosphere. He was a smart guy. He worked in research and development, the same department as me. And he used to love to play tricks with his new nephew. Sam would always buy some little stuffed animal and bring it over to give to his nephew. His nephew was real little. He'd bring a teddy bear or a cat or a dog or whatever. And one of the days, Sam was looking over the stuffed animals. He found a stuffed walrus, just a little stuffed walrus. He brought it along and he gave it to the boy. And the kid looked at it. Doggy? And Sam said, no, that's a walrus. And I'm sure if Sam would have been watching, he would have seen something like a camera go snap, store the image of something like this that's associated with this word walrus. So the next time he saw anything that looked like a walrus, his nearest similar thing now has something to pick. And to me, it was a perfect example of what happens when you go exploring around in a place you're not very familiar with. You may perceive things in ways that, walrus? Only because you've not perceived anything like it before. And as you learn to explore and learn more about what you're perceiving, you may begin to perceive things more clearly. Or I should say, a little closer to what's actually there. But there's more to that question, isn't there?
Well, I mean, yeah, I didn't know how in depth we could go on this, but just the balance between the two, the perceiver and the translator.
Yeah, it was when the first time I went to Gateway, people are talking about all these people they're seeing and their exercises and all these beautiful buildings, and I'm seeing absolutely nothing. To the point that I figure these people are lying just because they think they're seeing something, And at some point, I'm trying really hard to perceive anything. And then floating in space right in front of me is the most beautiful, shiny, big screw eye I've ever seen. You know what a screw eye is? You screw it into wood. It's got a big round thing on it. You can hang chains from it. Well, this one was chromed. It was shiny. There wasn't a nick or a scratch on it anywhere. I'm looking at this thing thinking, wow, look at that. I'm actually seeing something. And when I gave it in my debriefing in front of the group, one of the trainers said, Bruce, we don't very often comment on a participant's experience, but I'd say that's a pretty clear message. Just screw the eyes, Bruce. there are other ways to see. And I've just sort of run off into the weeds with my train of thought. So bring me back with that question again.
You were just talking about the balance between...
The balance, yes. So it got to the point where I realized that I could begin to start seeing something, and then it would disappear. And I eventually realized that as I began to see something, it was when I started talking to myself about what I was seeing, that's when it disappeared. That voice I call the interpreter's voice. Oh, look at that. It's a cat. That reminds me of a cat I had when I was a kid. And then we had that other cat. That one that got locked in the suitcase. And then later I had that cat that died of distemper. And it's like if you let your interpreter continue to make associations to associations, there's no place for you to perceive what's there now because you're so busy talking to yourself. And so I thought, well, the obvious solution is to stop talking to myself. And so I began to be really vigilant to the point that as soon as I heard myself begin to say anything, I just relaxed that feeling away, not allow myself to say a thing. It got to the point where you're in that sort of space where you can feel the word about to come up in your throat. I'd relax that away. So I didn't say a word. And that's when I learned out about the limitations of both the interpreter and the perceiver. Because at that point, it was like the next thing I knew, I was waking up. I clicked out. Clicking out's not like falling asleep. Clicking out is like I'm talking like this. Suddenly, I'm in the kitchen making dinner and have no idea what happened between me talking to you and what happened in the kitchen. A click out is just a sudden, complete break in any memory of any experience. So what I discovered was, oh, if I completely stop talking to myself, the perceiver is then the one that's the only one active, but the perceiver has no way to actually present the information that's now in my subconscious. It's just stuck in my subconscious. If I start to talk about it, that can help to make associations, things that are in my pre-existing experience and memory, and I can remember it, but if I talk too long, I'll lose track. And so I had to learn to find a balance between those two, the interpreter and perceiver. And what I found was, if I could just allow myself to, okay, I'm perceiving nothing, and then there's a cat standing on a table. If I just allow myself to say, there's a cat standing on a table, and then shut up, for the time that I was saying there's a cat standing on the table, I could see nothing. But as soon as I shut up, the cat's back on the table. And now it's jumped down to the floor and it's walking out the room. And if I say to myself, if I say here, or to a voice-activated tape recorder, oh, the cat just jumped off the table and is walking out the room, and then shut up, I can then perceive it again. I can see it again, so to speak. And I'm kind of careful with that word see because it implies too many things. I learned that you had to have a balance between those two factors, between the perceiver and the interpreter. And that once I found that balance, it got to the point where I could sort of make a running commentary of short comments without losing sight of what I was perceiving. That's the balance. And there's some exercises there's some exercises in the guidebook that describe how to do that.
So I just experimented a little bit with those, and I was completely blown away at how quickly everything you're saying was happening. I'm like, oh, this is real, it's like, so just one last question on this, about intent, like for that exercise, what was the intent for that?
Which
An
exercise?
exercise of kind of practicing the balance between the perceiver and the interpreter when you're closing your eyes and vision, and seeing and practicing shutting the interpreter up and
And if I understand your question is, it's like it is. What is the purpose of that exercise?
well, I was just thinking that you had said it's good to state an intention as you're doing or before you do the exercises so you're clear on what's happening. So for that one, your intention is just to learn more about the balance
Yes.
between the.
Yeah, and not well. When we say learn more about, what I would say is experience the balance and learn from that experience, so that you learn that when you allow yourself to talk too long, you lose connection with what you're perceiving. So from your own direct experience, you learn if you manage to completely shut off that voice, you click out. My Everything I teach is based on your direct experience, and I open every workshop by saying, okay, everybody in the room, do not believe a word that I say. Don't allow anything I say to be cause for you to change any of your beliefs about anything, because it's my belief that the only thing that should be allowed to change your beliefs about anything is your own direct experience. And so, yeah, that exercise is just one more in a exercise of experience where hopefully, as you do that exercise, you begin to get a feel for where that balance is and get a feel for at least when you're going too far off one way or too far off the other way.
Cool. Cool. Thank you very much.
Yeah. How did the exercise go for you? You said a lot of things are happening quickly.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I would just be black, nothing, but then other times, an image would appear, and I was like, "What? This is crazy!" Real freaking, you know,
Yeah.
the real life image right there. And so then I was seeing, I was kind of playing with how my mind would associate, and an image would go away, just like you say. And then, very interesting. I'm glad, I look forward to exploring that some more for sure. Just one last question on this. About intent, like for that exercise, what was the intent for that?
Which exercise?
Exercise of kind of practicing the balance between the perceiver and the interpreter when you're closing your eyes and vision, and seeing and practicing shutting the interpreter up and.
And if I understand your question is, it's like it is. What is the purpose of that exercise?
Well, I was just thinking that you had said it's good to state an intention as you're doing or before you do the exercises so you're clear on what's happening. So for that one, your intention is just to learn more about the balance
Yes.
between the.
Yeah, and not well. When we say learn more about, what I would say is experience the balance and learn from that experience, so that you learn that when you allow yourself to talk too long, you lose connection with what you're perceiving. So from your own direct experience, you learn if you manage to completely shut off that voice, you click out. Everything I teach is based on your direct experience, and I open every workshop by saying, okay, everybody in the room, do not believe a word that I say. Don't allow anything I say to be cause for you to change any of your beliefs about anything, because it's my belief that the only thing that should be allowed to change your beliefs about anything is your own direct experience. And so, yeah, that exercise is just one more in a exercise of experience where hopefully, as you do that exercise, you begin to get a feel for where that balance is and get a feel for at least when you're going too far off one way or too far off the other way.
Cool. Cool. Thank you very much.
Yeah. How did the exercise go for you? You said a lot of things are happening quickly.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I would just be black, nothing, but then other times, an image would appear, and I was like, "What? This is crazy!" Real freaking,
Yeah.
the real life image right there. And so then I was seeing, I was kind of playing with how my mind would associate, and the image would go away, just like you say. And then, so very interesting. And I'm glad, I look forward to exploring that some more for sure.
Mm-hmm. Well, sounds like for me, the exercise is doing what I intended it to do.